Hello everyone, Kyle Malone here from allocategp.com. Welcome. Today is the day. Today's the day we're going to start our journey of the 101 series within Microsoft Dynamics GP. We're focusing on the general ledger and bank reconciliation modules within GP today, but after this video, if you feel like learning more, check out the payables, receivables, fixed assets, tips and tricks, general navigation. The full 101 series will be available for your pleasure and for your learning opportunity. So we're happy to help. Hope you enjoy. Let's get to it. So before we start here, just a quick agenda of what we're going to kind of look at with the financial module today. We'll go through a short setup session. We'll talk about cards, transactions, inquiry, reports, utilities, and just general tips and tricks along the way. And then we'll talk about a few additional ones towards the end. Today we will be working within Microsoft Dynamics GP 2018. As we go through today, we'll talk about some of the new features that pertain to 2018, but 99% of what you're going to see applies to 2018, obviously, as well as most of the older versions. So without further ado, let's dive right in. So here we are within GP 2018. If you've used any version of GP in the past, this probably looks pretty familiar to you. So today, again, the general ledger and bank reconciliation, and that's going to be underneath this financial tab, the financial module within GP. So first thing we'll focus on here is the setup. You'll notice as we go through most of these windows, there's going to be a financial section and then there'll be a fixed asset section. Well, we're going to talk about fixed assets in a later series, so I'm going to go ahead and collapse these as we go through, just kind of clean up the windows as we're going through. So first things first, let's go ahead and let's just take a look at the setup window here under general ledger, and we'll talk about a couple of things that really stand out that you might care about. Next journal entry number, I would say go ahead and leave that as is. Your retained earnings account. So at the end of the year, when you're running your year-end process, all of your revenue and cost accounts are going to close to retained earnings. Voila, there is your retained earnings account. If you are in a company where you want to close to multiple retained earnings accounts, so say I have multiple lines of businesses or departments, whatever it is, I want to close to multiple retained earnings accounts, I can select this close to divisional account segments. And then I can select which segment of my chart of accounts I also want to close on. So what this says here is I'm always going to close to account 3030, but then it's going to close to each division that I have set up in the system. And my division is my third segment here. So if I have a division out here, it's called 01, 02, 03, it's going to close to 3030 01, 3030 02, 3030 03. Each one of those divisions will close to itself. So moving on here, maintain history. By default, most of these options are already selected. I might recommend also selecting the budget transactions. It's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to blow anything up, and you're not going to create a ton of data. So go ahead and keep it. You might thank yourself later. Allow options here. Allow posting the history. As we go through, you open and close fiscal periods, but allowing to post to history will let you post to a closed fiscal year after we run the close process, which is good. And we'll kind of get to the close process a little bit more towards the end, but just point is you want to enable this option because there are other ways to truly prevent closing to a closed fiscal year that we will cover. But if when the time comes, you do want to be able to post. So posting history, leave it enabled. So down here to reporting ledgers, if you want to have basically multiple books in your system, multiple ledgers, you can set that up here. You'll see by default it gives you a couple different ones. I have an IFRS book, I have a locals book. I might create. So if you want to have multiple reporting ledgers in the system, you can do so. So you see when I select it, I'm defaulted with an IFRS book, a local book. These are just different accounting practices, and it's really the concept that I can book journal entries to my base ledger, and then I can book similar entries to my IFRS ledger for different reporting purposes, whatever it is. You have that ability in the system with this multiple general ledgers. I'm going to deselect it. And the last bit here is the user-defined field setup. When I'm setting up accounts, there are going to be 4 user-defined fields in that window. If I want to capture additional information pertaining to that account, so let's say I have a a meals account, but I want to just put something called comments on it. So that way when I'm setting up my meals account, the comments on that account say must be approved by manager before using. I can go ahead and define those user-defined labels in this window. Outside of that, we'll go ahead and we'll move on. So moving on through the setup here, categories. When I'm setting up accounts, I can categorize them. So I could have cash accounts, inventory accounts, common stock accounts, tax expense accounts. If you want to create additional categories, just click in the final row down here, and I might say, let's just go ahead with just general profit and loss accounts. Tab out, click OK, and voila, I have a new account. All right, sorry, I have a new category. Segments, what are segments? Your chart of accounts is most likely broken down into multiple segments. Unless you're fortunate enough to not have to be in that situation, therefore your life is much easier. But for most, you'll have multiple segments. And so what I can do here is I can view all my segments. I'll go ahead and select my division, and then I can select which one I'm working with. So division 100 represents administration. So the segment windows here is just where I add labels to my segments. Moving on, quick journal entries. This is kind of a thing of the past. You don't really need to set up quick journal entries in the system anymore because there are more efficient ways and more visible ways to kind of create journal entry templates. But quick journal setups are in here. So basically what this is, it's going to let me kind of set up a journal entry template. It's going to say, okay, always credit a certain account, always debit certain accounts. So that way I can just open up my quick journal entry window and then type in my amounts and then just hit post. And again, it's just kind of it's a saved template for you. So I won't set one up today, but just know that quick journal entries do exist. Multi-currency, very, very quick note here. You always want to make sure you're setting up a new currency. If you ever find yourself in the position where you're setting up a new company, having a functional currency and a reporting currency is very, very important. And moving on, bank reconciliation. If I want to add different prefixes to my bank reconciliation transactions, so say I want my prefixes to be something different, I can change receipt from RCT to REC. Again, this is purely just so you know. I don't anticipate many people will be changing their prefixes. Microsoft gives them to you for a reason. But if you ever want to, you can certainly do so. What does matter here is my default checkbook ID. If I want to say that when I'm working in the financial module, the default checkbook I want to use is always going to be Uptown Trust, I can define that here. When I'm actually processing transactions, I can change it at a later time. But again, I would just go ahead and put in my default here. And then user define 1 and 2 fields. When I'm setting up checkbooks, kind of the similar concept with the accounts we talked about earlier, but I can set up default labels for user defined fields for a checkbook. And then moving on to the last bit here I want to touch on is deferrals. We won't go into a ton of detail because deferrals are a little more convoluted than what we have time for today. This is 101. But just know that if when the time comes you want to set up deferrals in the system, so deferred revenue or just really any type of deferral, you do have the ability to set up deferrals in the system. All right, so that's all I want to touch on for setup. I promise it would be quick. So let's go ahead and let's move into the card section. So what are cards? Cards are your master records in the system. A card is a GL account. A card is a customer, a vendor, a inventory item, a fixed asset. It is your master record in the system. It is what you're going to use to process transactions against. So cards in the financial module, I'm going to have things like checkbook. I'm going to have things like accounts. If I'm setting up a budget, I would set that up as a card as well. Again, this is just kind of where it all starts. So let's go ahead into a account window. And this is setting up a new account here. All right, so I'll just go with something random here. I'll just go 559876. You get it. The account description, typically your account description just represents your natural account. So I have 3 different segments in here. 559 might represent accounting, 8765 might represent meals and entertainment, and then 45 might represent a certain division. I wouldn't type all of that out. I just want to go ahead and just say this is for meals and entertainment. And you'll see where that comes into play when we're looking at some reports later if you're ever working in Management Reporter. All right, so moving through here, my category, this is a required field. I'll just go ahead and say that this is some sort of expense account. Cost of goods sold, sure, it's not really, but that's what we'll go with. And then my posting type. These are very, very important. If I leave it at balance sheet and it's really a P&L account, when I run my year-end close process, it's just going to roll the balance forward instead of closing it into retained earnings. So posting type, very important. And then typical balance here. This is just as you're processing transactions, if I select this account, it's going to automatically put me in the debit field. If my typical balance is a credit, as I'm going through and I select this account, it's automatically put my cursor into the credit field. So I go ahead and here, this is an expense account. I'm going to leave it at debit. And then here again, here's my comments. So let's go ahead and say, I'll say uses must be approved. And that's it. Setting up accounts, pretty straightforward. There are some other options in here that you don't typically mess with. If I'm ever setting up an account that I only want to use in the purchasing module, I might deselect some of these other ones. So that way, if I'm working in sales, when I do the account lookup in there, I'm not going to see this account. So this section right here might be something you use, but 9 times out of 10, put in your account description, your posting type, category, and you're done. So there we are. Next thing I want to take a look at here is a checkbook. So what is a checkbook? A checkbook really represents a bank account in most situations. So I already have a couple of checkbooks set up in the system. I'll just go with one that I already have. So this one represents my first bank account. It's a US dollars account, my cash account. This account should always be a one-to-one with your bank account. So what that means is I have a bank account, First Bank. I have a checkbook in the system called First Bank. My cash account should only be used by First Bank. So that way when I'm doing bank reconciliations, I'm reconciling my GL to my checkbook, it makes that process much easier if you have a one-to-one there. So just something to keep in mind. So scrolling through here, if I want to change, say my next deposit number, and I want to shrink some of these zeros out, I can do that. So that way when I'm booking deposits to this account, I don't have all those crazy long zeros. The check number, that's kind of, there's another piece that feeds into there, so I would leave the check number alone here. Your company address ID, what is your company address ID? I select the lookup. I'll just go ahead and select my primary address. My bank account number, this is important. This could print on the check. This could factor into EFT payments. So you want to make sure that's correct. Your bank ID. Would recommend go ahead and setting up the bank. So this was First Bank. And the reason you want to set this up is because of this information when you're processing EFT payments in the system. Again, this may feed into your setup there. So it doesn't hurt to go ahead and put it in now. And I'll leave it at that. And then my user defined fields, we saw this in the setup windows. I'm going to go ahead and just skip over those for now. My last reconcile balance, I've never reconciled this, so I'm just going to leave that alone. The max check amount, if I want to set that, I have that ability. I won't do that. If I want to put a password on this checkbook use across the board, I can do that here as well. I'm not going to do that. Do I want to allow duplicate check numbers? Not today. And then override, give me the ability to override the check numbers. It depends if you have pre-numbered check stock or not, but this might be an option you would consider. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. We'll take a look quickly here into the EFT bank settings. if I'm setting up this checkbook to allow EFTs, I would want to go ahead and set this up as well. So I'll say I have a United States bank here. Again, this is kind of duplicate information, but it doesn't hurt to put it all back in here, because some of these, depending on your EFT setup, are going to feed into your EFT files. All right, so I fast forwarded a little bit here just to not bore you. If you ever have questions on what type of information you actually need to put in here, contact your bank. They should know what you're looking for. So this will be my checkbook EFT setup. And if I want to go a step further in my setup here, I select my payables options, and then I can add a few bits of additional information. Do I want to require pre-notes? We could set that in here. My EFT numbering. Again, I don't really want all those zeros, so I'm going to shrink that down a little bit. And then I can actually set up EFT file formats in the system. So again, this is a time where you want to work with your bank and ask them what type of file format they require. And then if you were to get into the EFT configuration setup within GP, it kind of spits out a lot of those standard formats. So I won't cover all that today, but just know that those settings are available to you. So that is setting up a checkbook. And let's move on. Unit accounts. What are unit accounts? Well, they're anything that you want to track a quantity for and not a dollar for. So let's say I have a payroll expense for $100,000 and I want to go ahead and track my employee count as well. So that way when I'm doing reporting, I can break it down and say, okay, well, I have this salary expense. Well, in the report, I also want to divide that number by employees. So therefore, it'll spit out an average salary per person. So that's something you can definitely do with Manager Reporter and really any reporting tool that's looking at the GL tables in GP. So my unit account here, again, I can put in really whatever I want. My description, I would just say employees, decimal places. Last time I checked, you can't have half people, so we'll put that to 0. One thing I might want to consider is at the year-end close process, do I want the counter to restart or do I want it to basically roll forward? If I select this clear balance, it's going to restart, so that might make sense if I'm doing something like quantity sold. If my unit account represents some sort of quantity sold, I might want this to clear out and restart year over year. But I'm doing an employee count here, so I'm just going ahead and leave that option deselected. And then it just kind of shows you your balances, which we don't have any. It's a new account. And we'll close out. We'll show this a little bit later, but if I ever want to decrease my unit account value, I can do so using a journal entry. So it's kind of nifty. Obviously, your debits must equal your credits when you're processing anything in any accounting system. But with unit accounts, I can do my debits and credits for my typical dollar value accounts, and then I can add an additional line and say employees 2, and that's not going to trip up the journal entry. So we'll take a look at that later, but just an FYI. So moving on. So next thing we will look at here are our variable allocation accounts. A allocation account is just that. I can hit one account in the system, and then when I hit that account, it'll split out to whichever accounts that I've told it to allocate out to. So a quick example here. Just putting in mumbo jumbo. Let's put a split for payroll. And then a variable allocation account varies based on a variable. I just set up my employee account, so that would be my variable. So let's say I hit this account for $100,000. I wanted to split out across applied labor and then also split out across applied machine labor. My breakdown account, this is typically going to be a unit account. So I'll scroll down here and I'll select my employees account. So again, what this will do is it's going to, when I'm processing a transaction, I will hit this allocation account. The allocation account is going to split it into these two accounts based on the unit account fields. So kind of I understand that that's a little higher than 101, but I did want to show that there. The other side of that is we have a fixed allocation account. This one's a little more straightforward. If I have in account, I can go ahead and just define my fixed allocations. So in this example, I would hit account 6190 for utilities expense, and then it's actually going to break down to my predefined split to these other accounts. So that's a fixed allocation account. So budgets, we won't go into budgets a whole lot today, kind of a larger animal, but you do have the ability to set up your budgets, and you would set them up under cards. And once I set up a budget, I can add budget amounts, and then I can run my reports to report on budget versus actual. So under budgets. And the last thing I'll kind of mention today is the EFT file format. If when the day comes and you want to process EFTs in the system, again, work with your bank to determine what type of file format they need, and then come into the EFT file format setup and get that set up. So that does it for cards. Let's go ahead and let's move into transactions. We've laid the foundation with the setup. We've created our master records, being the accounts, the checkbooks. So let's go ahead and let's start processing some transactions against all that. So if I just want to process a plain Jane journal entry, I select the general section here under transactions. You notice it's going to give me my next journal entry that's in the system. The batch ID. So the whole batch concept is if you're going to be processing multiple transactions right now, you might want to go ahead and just create a batch. If I'm just processing one simple transaction and I'm done processing transactions for now, I'm not going to create a batch because it's just going to waste my time. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and create a batch because I have the intention to create 20 journal entries and then post them all at once. So again, let's just go with J.E. Kyle, and I'm going to tab out. Do you want to create this batch? Yes. And then what is this batch for? I'll just say this is my month-end journal entry collection. Hit enter. It's really saved. And we're moving on. All right, so what type of transaction am I posting? For now, I'm just going to process a standard transaction. We'll take a look at what a reversing transaction looks like here next. But a standard transaction, it's pretty simple. My source code here, I would recommend just leaving that as is. Your reference, this is actually a required field. And then when you're doing any type of reporting at the GL level, this is going to be the first field you see that kind of describes your journal entry. So my reference here, this might be monthly utility expense. And then I'll get onto my account here. So I'm actually going to scroll all the way to the bottom. We'll use one of those allocation accounts that we talked about earlier. So I have a utilities expense in here. And I'm going to go ahead and split this $1,000. So what's going to happen when I post this is it's going to take this allocation account and it's going to split it to those 5 or so actual distributions in the system. So we had set up the predefined splits. That's where it's actually going to post to. And nothing ever actually posts to 6190. It's just kind of a tool for you to use in the system. And then what's my credit? I'm going to do the lookup here. I would just take it out of petty cash. Tab out. This would be my first journal entry. I'm going to go ahead and select save. So I've now added it to my batch. I still haven't actually impacted my journal ledger. I've essentially just kind of written something in pencil. Once I post, I've kind of written in a pen to the GL. All right, so next transaction here. Let's go ahead and let's do a reversing transaction. So most common example here, this is going to be some sort of accrual. If I have a payroll expense accrual, this is how I'm going to book it with a reversing journal entry. So my first date here, I want to actually post it today, 04/12/2027, but then I want it to reverse on 05/01/2027. So this would, again, would just be payroll accrual. So then I just pop in my distributions and then I'm ready to go. One thing I do want to touch on that I didn't touch on in the first journal entry, see this little double chevron down looking button? Go ahead and select that, and that will give you additional information as to what you're working with here. So it'll show you the description of the account that you're entering to, And then it also gives you this distribution reference field. So if I want to add additional details, so I've already got this is a payroll accrual, but if I want to say this is for Jim and Sally, I can add that information at the line item level as well. And new with 2018, the collapsing or expanding of this window, when I hit save and I close out of here, if I were to open this back up, that option does save. So for those of you that haven't worked with GP in the past, and 2018 is your first exposure to GP, may not seem like a big deal, but in the past, it always became a request, hey, Kyle, how can we get this window to always show expanded? So that way I don't always have to go up here and click on this button. And we were always doing some crazy workarounds. So thank you, Microsoft, for making this a built-in feature. And I hope that it gets everyone else excited as it gets me. All right, so I'll shut up. So I'm going to save this transaction, and then I want to show one more here. We'll switch it back to a standard. My transaction date, that's the day I'm hitting the GL. My reference, I'll just go with something miscellaneous. And I get back down here. Well, on this one, I already have something in Excel that I want to get into here. Well, if you gander up a little bit here, there are copy and paste buttons. So how does that work? Well, guess what? I'm going to show you. So here I have a Excel copy and paste template. And again, it's a template. I have a little bit of instructions here that I've jotted down. But what you do is, if you want to use the copy and paste functionality within GP for journal entries, this is the format that you're following. My first column has to be my description. So that would be my distribution reference. Second column, my account number, and then your debit and credit. So when I take this information and I copy it, it should look just like this. So again, I'm going to copy, get back over to GP. An important note here is you always want to click in your first field, and then I want to go up to paste. So voila, very, very quick, very, very simple. That eliminates the need for those quick journal entries. That eliminates the need in a lot of situations for recurring journal entries. And that eliminates the need, honestly, for a lot of integrations that we've kind of set up for customers in the past. That copy and paste, very powerful, very quick, very simple, and it works. I have yet to see someone actually put in too much data that the copy and paste couldn't handle. So great tool. I would recommend using it. So again, I'm going to save. All right, so I have 3 transactions in my batch. Let's go ahead and I want to post my batch. The process to post a batch is click this little blue arrow next to the batch ID, and then I want to make sure I close out of the transaction window, and then I want to go over here and click post. If I were to click post before I close out of the transaction window, I would have gotten an error that said that that batch was still being edited. Well, it's because I had the window open. So again, close your transaction window, come in here, click post. And when I post, I'll be prompted to print some reports. So this one is the General Ledger Posting Journal. I do want to go ahead and take a look at this. I'm going to print it to the screen. And we'll kind of talk about some of the journal entries that we just posted. But if there is something you want to print out of the system, this is going to be your report. You'll see here pretty much lists everything we just did. It has the header information, has the distribution information, the type of journal entry, who posted it, etc. So again, this is probably your report if you want to file something away. Keep in mind that any report that you get out of GP, just about any report you get out of GP, you can go back in and regenerate at a later date. So I would say it's not necessarily required to print the journal entry at the time you're posting, but I get it. So let's take a look at our journal entry here, our journal entries here. This was the first one. We actually used the allocation account here starting off. You'll notice that here it does not show the actual GL distribution. So something to kind of keep in mind. But this account is simply a pass-through account, and when I go and we're looking at inquiry later, you can see where it actually hit the actual destination accounts. So nothing is actually hitting 6190, it's all hitting the allocated to accounts. The next one here, you see we have our reversing journal entry. Well, the first 2 lines, they represent the first. The second 2 lines represent the reversing. And then the last one we have was just a simple journal entry where we use the copy and paste, but again, it works great. So there you are. So we'll close out of there. And there we are. We just processed our first journal entries in the system. So moving on, clearing entries. If I ever just want to flat out set an account to 0, I can use a clearing entry. I'm not going to do that right now, but that does just that. If I have an account that has a $100,000 balance and I want to set it to 0, this is a quick way to set it to 0. So I'll clear that. Budget transactions, if I'm ever entering in, if I ever want to enter in transactional information for my budgets, so say I'm expecting a $100,000 invoice from Microsoft, I would go ahead and enter that in as a budget transaction. And then that will increase my budget amount, and I can view my budget versus actual reports towards the end. The batches window, this should look familiar. This is what we were just looking at. If I ever know that I have a batch sitting out there, I can open up the batches window, take a look here, and see what's out there. The series post. So the series post is going to show me all batches that are available in the system. So if I am, say, an accounting manager and I always want to review everyone's transactions before they're posted and finalized, they might all go out there and create their batches. They might save their batches and they might let me know that they're available. Well, then me as the accounting manager, I can open up the series post window, view all the batches, and then click through these batches and ultimately see what's out there waiting for me to post. So that's the series post. All right, so moving on. So we'll take a look at bank transaction entry. If I ever have a cash distribution that doesn't stem from the subledger, say the sales module or the purchasing module, whatever it might be, I would just go directly into a bank transaction entry. One thing to note is if I ever do need to hit my cash account directly, I always want to use a bank transaction entry. If I just book a journal entry to cash, well, there's going to be nothing to reconcile against. Because when I'm doing my bank reconciliation, it'll say, well, you had a $100,000 debit to cash, but it's not tying out to anything at the checkbook level. So keep that in mind. Anything that hits cash, you do want to put it through a bank transaction entry. And most of this is pretty straightforward. This is where I would select my checkbook. This is money going out the door. Who did I pay it to? Just go with Joe Schmo. And we'll just say he's a painter. And the amount that I paid Joe was $1,000. You'll see it's crediting the cash account that's associated to this checkbook by default. And then on the other side of this would be some sort of expense account. So that would be it. I hit post, and now I have created a transaction that I later have to reconcile when the check actually clears. All right, so also under bank transactions, if I want to do a receipt, I would select enter receipt. And same concept there. If I was actually given cash, I would select cash, put the cash amount. If I was given a check, I can put the check and put the check number in there. This is going to debit my cash account, hit whatever offset account that I have, and then it's actually going to create a bank deposit that we'll have to later go in here and mark and then ultimately reconcile it. So cash receipts that didn't come from the sales module, this is where you want to book them. And then also in here, if I ever have a receipt or I have a transaction that I process in here, I can go into the same window, hit the void button, and then pick the existing transaction or receipt and void it. So that's it for that. We'll take a look at the bank deposits real quick. All right, so bank deposits. So the concept is, if I, as a clerk, I'm processing a ton of cash receipts during the day and they're actually hitting customer accounts, well, when that money is sent to me, I only see one line item on my bank statement. So what that is I can go through here and I could say that all of those particular cash receipts represented one deposit that I got with the bank. With GP 2018, there's the ability to automatically do this step. So if you don't really care about going in and marking which bank deposit matches which cash receipt in the system, you can set up the system to do that for you automatically. And that is actually under a company setup option. So I'll show that very quickly here. So under admin, setup, company, if I click on options under here, very bottom, automatically post cash receipt deposits. So that will handle that step for you. That's it for bank deposits. Let's go back to our financial module here, and we'll keep moving. Bank transfers, I think it's pretty straightforward. If I want to move from one checkbook to another, I can handle that here. And then if I ever need to void a bank transfer, there's the option to void from here as well. And then the last bit I want to touch on here is the reconcile bank statement process. So with the reconcile bank statement process, this is the process that you're going to tie your checkbook back to your cash account, the general ledger. So I might say that my bank statement ending balance for the end of the month is $80,000. And this is as of 04/30/2027. All right, this is just asking me if I want to match deposits within 8 days grace period. Just go ahead and select yes. So then what this is going to bring up, it's going to bring up all of your outstanding checks or deposits that you've yet to reconcile. So as checks have cleared, I would come in here and I would select the checkbox to say that yes, this check is cleared. Sorry, that's the deposit. Or as this deposit has hit my bank account, yes, I've reconciled it, it's cleared, and so forth. The point is you want to get your reconciled checkbook balance to match your GL cash account balance. If you find yourself in a position where they don't tie, well, you'd want to go back and take a look at your bank statement to see what's going on. Well, you know, what's a reconciling item. If you find out that you have maybe a bank fee that you hadn't recorded, I can actually go in here under the adjustment section, and then I can say something like other expense or service charge. I can put it to whichever account is my bank fees expense. And then I can enter that balance. To ultimately get the difference between my GL account and my bank checkbook to 0. I would hope that no one's getting $200,000 service charges on their bank account. So that's a bank reconciliation process. When I'm done, I would select reconcile. I could print a report here. Actually, I'm going to skip the first one. I want to print the cleared transaction report for the month, and then I also want to print the outstanding transaction report for the month. So here are all the transactions that I cleared, and then here's what's left. Both of these reports you can pull at other times in the system, so print them here if you like, but you do have the ability to pull it after the fact. So that's it for bank reconciliation. And that also wraps up the transaction section. So the next thing we'll take a look at here is the inquiry section. So again, I want to collapse the fixed assets, clean this up a little bit. So what are inquiries? So inquiries are going to let you pick out one thing in the system and view detail regarding that one thing. So my one thing might be an account. I can select an account and then I can see all the detail, any debits, credits that hit that account. Same thing with checkbook. I can look at a bank register for one particular checkbook and view all the transactions that have gone in and out. If you're looking for more data at once, you're talking about reports, which we'll touch on next. But again, we'll start just with inquiry. So, summary here. This is an account summary. It's just going to give you your periodic balances, and then I can click into one particular period, click a link up top here, and then it'll show me the detail at the journal entry level, and then I can click on a particular line item here, click the journal entry button, and actually open up the journal entry in the system. So pretty intuitive, and basically you can drill all the way down to the finest level of detail. So that's the summary and detailed inquiry. Journal entry inquiry, if I know a particular journal entry that I want to get more detail for, I could go in here and just type it in. Let's see if journal entry 200 exists in the system. It does. It tells me that it occurred in year 2024, and here is all of my information pertaining to this journal entry. And then you have budget versus actual reports. These are pretty nifty because it's just a simple window, so I can select a certain account. I can say, okay, show me the budget versus actual for my 2008 budget, and there it would have it. So I have my actual amount, I have my budget amount, my variance, and my percentage variance. So pretty nifty little screen if someone stops by your desk and they say, okay, show me how we're looking with meals and entertainment for the year. Voila. So that's kind of it for the financial side of things. There's a couple other inquiry windows that are out here. You can feel free to go out here and kind of play around. But for the majority, you'll be using summary, detail, and the budget versus actual. So let's go down a little bit further here. Let's take a look at the checkbook register. So this is going to let me select one checkbook and let me view everything with that checkbook. Everything in, everything out. I have no filters up here to filter on a range. I can do that. If I just wanted to look at unreconciled transactions, I select my option, hit redisplay, there I am. If I say, okay, only show me between a particular date, so let's do 10/15/2023 to 01/31/2024. I select redisplay, and you'll see that my list just got a whole lot shorter. If I want to take this information and print it into a report, I can click the print option up here, print the screen, and there you are. So that's it for the checkbook register. And then if I want to take a quick snapshot of my checkbook balance, so if I want to do that, I can do that here as well. Okay, so that does it for inquiry. Let's take a look at some reports. So reports, there are financial statements that are kind of set up for you already in the system. It's based on the account classes that you have set up. So if I properly put my accounts into a cash category, it's going to flow through a cash bucket. Same thing with prepaids, profit and loss accounts. The financial statements that are available in the system, very generic, and they are built on the account categories. So I'm actually not even going to take a look at those. If you're interested in financial reporting, take a look at Manager Reporter. That's the one that's given to you out of the box. There are other reporting options out there in the GP world, but Manager Reporter, that's going to be the one you're going to see the most of. Other things, if I want to print out a trial balance, I'll select the trial balance option here. I'm just going to print a summary option. I'm going to select my existing report that I've already built. I'm just going to select modify. And I'll say that I want to include posting accounts. Let's go ahead and include unit accounts. I don't want any subtotals by division or anything. And I just want to generate it as of today. So I'll select the current date period. Let's go ahead and print it to the screen. Select print. And then here is my summary level of trial balance. If I were to generate the detailed level trial balance, that's going to give me one line for every single distribution in the system. So summary trial balance, there you are. All right, and then other reports in the system, there's a cross-reference report. So I mentioned that most of what you do in the system, you can pull a report for it after the fact. So for the cross-reference reports, if I ever need to reprint for a certain batch that I posted in the past, I could pull the audit trail code from that batch, and then I could print my report for that batch. If I have a particular journal entry or a range of journal entries, I could print a report for a range of journal entries and hand it to my auditors if that's who's asking. So cross-reference, that's where you can find them in the financial module. Then you have your budget reports. We'll take a quick look here. I would select the budget that I'm working with here, insert my filter, and then print it to screen. So this doesn't give you any budget versus actuals. This might be a report that you review after you've just imported your budget or just after you set up your budget. Your large budget versus actual reporting, that type of reporting should come from Manager Reporter as well. Okay, so moving on. If I just want to take a look at all of my accounts in this system, so say I'm trying to standardize, or I'm just trying to review and make sure we don't have a bunch of junk out there, I can print an account report. I can also print a checkbook report, so a list of checkbooks. If I want to print my checkbook register, I can do that here underneath the checkbook section. And then the last pretty important section down here is the bank posting journals. So again, I mentioned most of the reports you can regenerate after the fact. So if you remember when we reconciled our checkbook, 2 reports popped open. One was the cleared transactions report. So that's an option in here. And the other is an outstanding transactions report. So you can reprint both of those reports after the fact. And again, that was under reports, bank posting journals. All right, so other reporting outside of Manage Reporter, we'll take a quick look at Smart List. Under the financial section here, you have accounts. So this is what you would think it is. It's just your listing of accounts. Your account transactions. This is going to be every debit and credit ever in the system. And then bank transactions, which is basically going to be your checkbook register. So with each one of these reports, if you're familiar with Smart List, you can add columns, you can add your own filters, you can save your own version of this report. That's where Smart List is very powerful. Kind of gives you a little bit of power in the system. But what you see here are really just the out-of-the-box reports. If you ever have further questions on Smart List and really what you can do with Smart List, take a look at our blog, take a look at some of our other YouTube videos, as we do cover those in much more detail. So that wraps up reporting. The last couple things I want to touch on here. There's a reconcile to GL tool, which is a somewhat new feature to GP, but it is very, very powerful. And I'll do a quick demo of this. So I have a saved option out here I've already built. So what this is going to give me, it compares my general ledger to my receivables module, and it just looks at my accounts receivable account. So it's going to spit out a beautiful report that basically shows me everything in the GL, everything in the AR module, and then it shows me any variances and anything that maybe happened in one module but didn't happen in the other. So I go ahead and select process. And then here we are. So again, this is everything in my receivables module, everything that hit the GL, and it shows me all of my match transactions. And then if I had anything that had maybe hit the GL but didn't come from the receivables module, it would show underneath this match transactions, unmatched transactions. So very powerful. So if I'm at the end of the month and my ledgers aren't tying, I can just generate this report and almost instantly be able to identify where my outage is. In years past, you would actually have to go through potentially your list of transactions and be like, okay, yeah, this transaction happened in the subledger. Do I see it in the GL? Yes, I do. Okay, let's move on. So again, very powerful tool. And this is the reconcile to GL tool. Reconcile to GL under your financial routines. Also here, the year-end closing process. We won't spend a lot of time talking about this, but this is where you're going to run at the year-end. The year-end process is much more involved than we have time to talk about today. And again, here it is. And then the last couple options we have here, if we set up our checkbooks to require pre-notes, this is where I'm going to go to generate the pre-note file that I'm going to send to the bank. The bank will then work sending the pre-notes out to the vendors. And then if I set up electronic bank reconciliation in the system, so earlier we went through the reconcile checkbook process, there was a lot of checkboxes there. So if I set up an electronic bank rec, I can actually download a file from my bank, run it through the electronic reconcile, and it's going to go through and check all those checkboxes for us. So would highly recommend looking into that one. And then last bit here, the SafePay module. If we're concerned with check security, we want to make sure that no one's clearing checks for something different than we wrote. No one's writing fake checks in the system. We can work with our bank to set up the SafePay system. And basically what this is as we create check batches in the system, we send the bank a file, and then the bank says, okay, well, nothing can cache that doesn't match this file. So it's an additional level of security and something you can set up with your bank. Last section I want to touch on here briefly is the utilities section. The first thing that's here is the reconcile. If there are ever times in the system that you'd say you're looking at accounts and it just doesn't seem like some of the windows are tying out the way that they should, start with your reconcile. Every now and then there could be a disruption in the system where something happens in detail but it doesn't update a summary table. So if you go in here, you select reconcile, you select, okay, let's go ahead and reconcile to a particular year, just true up the balances. Again, good place to start. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you have 20 years of activity in GP, you do have the ability to remove history from the system. Make sure you tie down security to this one. But this can kind of clean up 15 years of history, so that way your system's moving a little quicker and you don't have as much historical data in there as you don't care about. Plus, after a certain number of years, the auditors can't audit information that you don't have. That one's free. All right, everyone, that just about does it here. One note I left out earlier, the Excel copy and paste template, that will be in the description below, a link to that. And that wraps it up. Everyone, that is General Ledger and Bank Reconciliation 101 within Microsoft Dynamics GP. We made it. I hope you got a lot out of that. Let us know in the comments below what else you're interested in hearing about. We're going to continue pushing these videos out. So if you have a topic in mind, let us know. Feel free to subscribe, stay up to date with what we're up to. Check us out on Facebook. Check out the alacartegp.com webpage. We're constantly posting blog content along with our YouTube video posts. So a lot of great information out there. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you'd like, or shoot me an email at kylemalone@alacartegp.com. That's it for today. Thanks, everyone.